Thanks everyone for joining me today. I have the great pleasure to have a conversation with Chris, who currently has the Amateur Traveler. He's been podcasting and reporting on travel for many years, maybe more than he wants to admit, but thank you for joining.
19, so I'm willing to
19?
admit it.
Okay. So thank you for joining me today, Chris. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So take us back. I know for some people they were blessed with parents and family that kind of nurtured that travel seed in them. Others, as kids didn't get to travel as much. Where did that travel bug start from?
It definitely started from my parents, but not so much with international travel. By the time that I graduated college, the only other country I had been to was Canada. But we did a lot of travel, especially in the American West, and to a lot of national parks, pulling a $400 used travel trailer that I think was 14 foot if you counted the hitch. So it was probably a really an 11-foot trailer that the four of us, my brother and my parents and I, would habitate as we went around the West and went to different states and national parks and things like that. And that's a lot of where my travel bug came from. And then I, being a history buff, we also did a great big trip in the year after the bicentennial in
Oh,
1977 because we were trying to avoid the crowds to a lot of the historic sites in the East Coast, where I think we put 2,000 miles on a series of rental cars, trying to see as much as we could.
that's fabulous. Yeah, that's kind of similar to me. With the paper maps and the summer vacation and just a car. We didn't do as much camping, but just what a glorious era, of exploring too.
Yeah, I think by the time I graduated college, I'd been to more than half the states, but again, not to many foreign countries.
So when did you start the Amateur Traveler podcast?
In July 2nd of 2005 is as far as I can recall the first episode of the Amateur Traveler podcast.
And kind
And
of why did you get into
yeah,
it?
so podcasting started, for those who don't know, what is an official podcast. I mean, obviously there was audio on the internet for a while. There was some video on the internet, certainly by 2005 as well. But although we didn't have the video was tended to be a lot smaller at that time, especially in the late 90s and things like that. I actually worked on the QuickTime plugin when I worked at Apple for some of the first video on the internet, but that's another story. Didn't work on it for very long. And then so podcasting started in around September of 2004.
Yeah.
And one of the tech shows that I was listening to on or watching on TV was taken off the air around December of 2004. This Week in Tech then was started as a podcast. And I discovered it when they were saying, well, we're becoming a podcast. And of course, like all of us, I had that moment of what's a podcast? My moment just came in 2004. And so I started listening to podcasts into, late in 2004, early in 2005, and thought I've got to do my own show. And I thought about doing a tech show because I am a nerd. But I think one of the reasons I didn't is I'm a Mac nerd, and Adam Christensen, no relation, doesn't spell it the same, started his MacCast show. It's ridiculous. There are many more than that. And then I thought about a religious show, and then I don't even know if a travel show had come to mind, but we had some friends over for Memorial Day picnic, and all the best stories that people told were travel stories
Yeah.
because travel has a way of taking us out of our everyday, and so it tends to be memorable, it tends to be significant. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a travel show. I'm going to do a show about my travels, which was a really stupid idea because I was working full time. I was traveling 4 weeks a year and podcasting 48 weeks a year, and that math doesn't work. I was running out of stories. And I started having friends on the show to talk about their travel stories, and I still do. It's just that my circle of friends has grown over here over the last 19 years. So I have a number of different people come on now who might be bloggers, podcasters, listeners of the show, guidebook authors, locals, or just travelers. And so that has become a largely interview show. Although we still talk about my travels more, obviously, the years that I'm traveling. And I have gone from full-time work to part-time work to taking a career break to back to full-time work and now retired from the day job. So my amount of travel has gone up and down over the years. And I've been to now more than two countries. So
Yeah. So what would you say some of your favorite destinations that you've personally traveled have been?
well, I still love the American national parks. So I will give a nod to that. Although these days I tend to respond with places like Botswana, the Okavango Delta in Botswana, which is amazing for the wildlife, or the history in Istanbul or in Egypt, amazing, or being in the temple complex in Siem Reap in Cambodia, also amazing. So those are some of the things that come to mind, but I tend to like every place I've been to various degrees. And, I've gone there because I wanted to go there and I can't really think of, bad places, like places I wouldn't go back to.
Well, that's good. That's positive
Yeah.
for people. Yeah. So what are some of the changes you've seen in travel? I mean, it's just really been in our lifetime, at least, I feel like there's been a lot of change.
There has been a lot of changes. So in my lifetime, the biggest changes, and a lot of people don't remember the deregulation of airlines in the US. So it really wasn't something that everyone could travel at one time, because where you went, it depending on how far you traveled, especially in the U.S., you paid proportionate to that. There were no deals, there were no cross-country sales or things like that, and it was more expensive. It was nicer in terms of the experience. I remember dressing up to travel. That was something we used to do. So that was a big change. But the other change has been more recently since I started podcasting, and that's the smartphone. If you think about how you can be someplace and pull out your phone and get a hotel room and book a flight and translate a sign
I know.
and take a picture. It is stunning how that has changed travel so much. And get turn by turn directions being told to you in your earpiece, as well as listen to podcasts and things like that. That has been a real game changer and probably one of the biggest change in travel that I have seen. And that has not really been all that long.
No, it hasn't. Especially like the directions and being, like punching in a place and
Right,
like you
right.
said, the turn by turn. And there's positives and negatives, I think, to some of that. There's kind of been a over interest in some locations, which can be challenging for those
Well,
destinations.
there's always been an overinterest in some locations. It's just before it was Paris and London. And what has changed is more of I want to go there because I've seen that one picture of it.
Yeah.
And the best example I can think of that is when I was in Jordan, talking to my tour guide. The tourism board of Jordan brought me over years ago for about 10 days and gave me a guide and driver, which is, nice.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a good job when you can find it. And so I got to know our guide, and he was talking about when you go to Petra. And Petra is an amazing site. And those who are not familiar with Petra, if you've seen the third Indiana Jones movie where they go and find the Holy Grail, they go into this structure that is carved into the stone, a city that's carved in the stone, and the outside of that is Petra. The inside of that is fictional, but when they go there and go through these slot canyons and then see this building, and this building is called the Treasury Building, that is an amazing scene. And the guy, for instance, when he had only half the group could go all the way through the slot canyon, because it's something like a mile walk to get to that one shot. But the other part of the group would take that one picture and they would leave. And there's much more to that site than that. So it isn't even so much that the site is overcrowded, it's that one photo spot that's overcrowded. And people wanted to get that one photo. And just didn't care or just didn't know that there is a whole inner city carved in stone. There's a Roman part of it. There's a the
Oh, wow.
Nabatean part of it. It's an amazing place, but what they have seen is that one photo, and they want to have that one photo, usually with them in the photo. That's quite often I see people with their selfies, and it's like that's fine if that's what's for you, but there are other things. And the flip side of that, I think, is I was just in Puerto Rico for a TBEX. You and I met
Yeah,
at a TBEX
right.
conference. I was at TBEX Puerto Rico, the Travel Blog Exchange conference, one of the larger travel blogging conferences. And I did a fam trip, a familiarization trip. And the highlight of the trip by far was going into the bio bay, one of the three bio bays in Puerto Rico. And it was the least Instagrammable portion of the trip because if you have a smartphone, you just can't take a picture of what's you're seeing is these microscopic glow in the dark um,
Right.
organisms in the water so that when you scull through the water or you're kicking to tread water, you're glowing. Basically, the water around you is glowing, and when you take your hand out of the water, you'll see little pinpoints of light dripping down your hand, and it is just stunning and amazing. And I was telling them, come back and pick me up tomorrow. I just
Yeah.
don't want to get out of this. Is But I have one fuzzy picture of me basically that kind of looks like a light version of a snow angel, but you can't even tell it's me. It's not very Instagrammable, but it's very memorable. And
Wow.
so Instagrammable and good are sometimes the same, and sometimes we really need to expand our vision to see the things that are not Instagrammable and still amazing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's definitely true. And TBEX has changed a little bit. I've only been now to two TBEXs, and it's kind of
As you
grown.
change
It,
a bit, yeah.
yeah, it's not just bloggers. I don't
Mhm.
think. I think it's kind of tell us about TBEX for those that aren't familiar.
Yeah, so TBEX started by accident. I don't know if you've heard that story. In
No.
2009, Kim Mance originally started TBEX, and what happened was she was a travel blogger, and she was going to be attending the Blog Her conference, the Women in Blogging conference in Chicago, where she lived. And she wrote to four friends, I think it was four, and said, hey, do you want to come early, sleep on my floor for a couple nights, and we'll talk travel blogging? And they said, that sounds terrific. That sounds like a great idea. And then one of them said, should we invite the guys? We
Right?
weren't going to the Blog Her conference. Oh, well, I guess we could. And it ended up being an impromptu conference with all day panel discussions on various aspects of travel blogging, and they even got some sponsors and did a goodie bag sort of thing that was a backpack that my wife still has. And
Wow.
it was the first time that a lot of us who were that first generation of travel bloggers met in person. And so it was a fascinating, great day in a overheated room provided by the Chicago Tourism Board that had a view of Millennial Park and the Cloud Gate or the Bean
Yeah.
in Chicago. So, but it was just an amazing time. And people at the end said, "Where's it going to be next year?" And Kim was like, "What do you mean next year?"
Yeah,
But
exactly.
she took the challenge and she ran the conference. She did four more conferences, as I recall. So she did New York, Vancouver, Copenhagen, which I did not get to. And then by the time she did Vancouver, the next day, she was done. She just did not want to run a conference. She was charging not nearly enough money. She didn't I think she was charging $50 for a 2-day conference and didn't have coffee because you couldn't really
Yeah,
afford it on a budget.
right.
And people were like complaining there was no coffee. It's like, hey, you went to a 2-day conference for $50, get your own damn coffee. But she was done running a conference at that point. And so she picked up the phone and called Rick Calvert, who now owns TBEX and who had already approached her about buying the conference and sold it, I think, right away after that Vancouver one. And then she still ran one more. And then Rick took over in 2013.
Oh,
Sorry.
wow.
His first conference that his team ran was the largest, actually, which was 1,300 people in Toronto. A little too big, but
Yeah,
it's
that's
never been
a
that big again
lot.
and never really tried to be that big again. So now they tend to be in the 300s here post COVID. So somewhere in that range. 350, I think, was San Sebastian, somewhere in that range, and over 300 was Puerto Rico. And
Okay.
yeah, it was always at least travel bloggers and podcasters because I've been there since the beginning. But there certainly have been more and more video, more Instagrammers and other influencers as well. But it does focus a lot on travel blogging and how you can make a living from travel blogging, even in years like this where we've had significant changes in Google algorithms that have ruined a lot of travel blogs in terms of where 90% of their traffic went away overnight. So
Yeah,
been a tough year for
exactly.
a lot of people.
Yeah, it has been for that niche and where to write and where to,
Hmm.
get that payment essentially to support it.
Well, and the demographics of the conference have changed a lot. I think at the first few conferences, I what I remember was that most people that Gary Arndt was there, who is a friend of mine and was a well-known travel blogger. He's recently gone in more podcasting and less blogging and less travel, but he was about 10 years older than most of the attendees. I want to say all the attendees, but I learned that I was wrong about that. But in my memory, it was he was 10 years older than everybody else, and I was 10 years older than him. And that demographic has really expanded where there are definitely still people in their 20s for sure. I think almost everybody on my fam was in their 20s or early 30s, but on the other hand, there's also people like me who are retired. And so it's quite the gamut in terms of the age of people who are attending at this point, and a lot more professional bloggers exist than existed back in 2009. People who really make a living at it make, five, six, seven figures
Wow,
doing these things, eight figures for a couple people. So
that's
that's
amazing.
unusual.
Yeah. But that's what attracted me when I went. I mean, when I went to my first TBEX, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect.
Hmm.
And it was in Wisconsin, but just
And
that gamut
didn't
of,
didn't go to that one. That was
oh,
one of the
you
ones I
did.
missed. Yeah,
It was
I
just
I missed three, so that was one
okay.
of them.
Yeah, but it's just the range of, types of bloggers.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's older bloggers, there's solo bloggers, there's families that blog.
Hmm.
I mean,
Absolutely.
just a really,
And they're people who are having success in a large variety of ways. People who have their own tour companies, people who are still making a living from the advertising and the affiliate links, people who are travel advisors, people who make products that they sell to people, people who are doing work for DMOs, destination marketing organizations, to which are tourism boards, and they're selling their services. So it's interesting, and you go, and it's funny because I've been doing this a long time and have had some success with it. And I go, and I usually have two different reactions. One is, wow, I've got to try that, and that was an interesting talk, and there's way too many things that you could try that you hear about there, and you get this extra level of excitement, and then the other almost simultaneous response is, I'm such a poser. Boy, I tell you, some of these people are
yeah,
just so much better at that than I am, or so much better at this than I am, or whatever. And those are both true. Those can both easily be true. You run into the person who's doing the drone video, and it's just amazing to watch. And there's some really interesting and talented people, but also it's a very fun conference, very much of a community type of approach, which is what I was hearing this year from people who were coming for the first time. It's like, wow, I like these people. So,
yeah, and that's what I liked. I didn't feel, even though I kind of feel like sometimes the day to day, because I'm not definitely not at the level where what I'm doing with my video, I guess that's a vodcast.
hmm.
So, I'm not supporting, this is a passion project right
Right,
now,
right.
but I never felt like people looked at me differently. People were very welcoming. The sessions are very inclusive.
Hmm.
Um, you learn a lot.
Although they don't do as many beginner sessions as they used
Um,
to do, they're intentionally trying to make more. Um, try and stretch people. And
Yes.
so you won't find the intro to SEO class, but you'll find the okay, here's what we do now for SEO after the helpful content update from Google, or this is, a way to make new products for your blog that you could sell people, or those sort of things. A lot of things have to do with the craft, and then also the monetization, because a lot of people who would like to do this for their full-time job if they don't already.
Right. And you're definitely right. There's not a lot of beginner like getting started
No, very
or
intentionally, very intentionally. I talked to them this time about, what they were doing and where they are going forward, and that is what they're focusing on right now.
and
And I
they're
think there are a lot of those beginning classes online now too. In fact, many of the people who are speakers have some of those classes that you could take, uh, for instance, before you come or after you come. So
yeah, I think that's definitely true. And they're doing something different with and I don't know if you understand it. I'm trying to get
the
Rick
the
about the
TBEX
Alaska.
summit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand a little bit about that. I've talked to him about it. I don't know if I can properly represent it, but the summit itself, is going to be a little smaller. It's going to be possibly more. I don't know that they've quite said that. So I think there may be. This is the part that I'm still trying to understand. There was a TBEX summit back in Ireland pre-pandemic, which was
Oh,
invitation only, and it was a whole day roundtable discussion with various people, invite only, and then they produced a series of white papers that came out of that about the state of blogging or those sorts of things. And when Rick was describing it, he still had a component of that, and then also, regular sessions as well. So that's the part that I'm still not quite as clear on, of how different it is from the first summit that they did. But yeah, they're doing one in Anchorage this fall, and then they're doing one in Wichita next fall, I think it is,
oh
in
wow.
2025.
Yeah, I'll be curious because I'm definitely, Anchorage is a beautiful place for those who've
I
not.
I would love to be there. I will miss that one. I will be on a press trip for travel podcasters in Madeira, Spain. So
Ooh, oh wow. So you'll be going back to Spain.
yeah, it's a dirty, thankless job, but somebody's got to do it. So.
Have you been, when you started the podcast and you started talking to other travelers that you were invited on, were there
Mhm.
destinations that inspired you to then want to go there?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There still are things that are on my list from the show. Right now on my list, for instance, I'm going to be in Istanbul for the SATW conference, the Society of American Travel Writers conference in November. And I haven't been to the Caucasus, so to Armenia, Georgia, or Azerbaijan, and I haven't been to some of the Balkans, to Albania, North Macedonia, Kosovo, Serbia, for instance. I haven't been to those. And, I'll be right in between those. And we've done some episodes on both recently. And it's like, I don't know which way to go. I want to, I will go see some of those. But I think of years ago, I had a travel writer on, Zora O'Neill, who wrote the Moon Handbook for the Yucatan Peninsula.
Oh, wow.
And she talked about going to the Yucatan, and she said you should certainly go to Chichen Itza. Everybody goes to Chichen Itza. You should skip Cancun. It's just an American party city, but you should stay in Playa del Carmen. You should go out to Merida. You should go on a Sunday when there's the festival in the main square in the Zocalo, and people are dancing in the square, and you can get your street tacos. And then you should go down to the Ruta Puc, and the Ruta Puc is some lesser known Mayan sites. One where you can go into a cave with 10,000-year-old cave art, and then other things like other more typical Mayan sites, but they're lesser known and less crowded than Chichen Itza. And as soon as I heard that, I wanted to do it. It took us a few years to get there, but finally went down there with two carloads of friends and family to go
Wow.
explore some of those sites, including places like Koba where you ride your bike through the site because it's so large. They will rent you bikes and you can still climb the Mayan pyramids. And
Oh,
I
wow.
had an experience where I was standing on top of a Mayan pyramid early in the morning before the tour buses came, and I was by myself. And it was just amazing
That is
looking out in distance
amazing.
at the jungle canopy. So
Wow.
yeah, absolutely. There are times that I have people on the show and I think, well, I'm not going there. But probably more often than not, I have yeah, okay, well, that's on the ever-growing list.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there are for some people, it's all about your level of comfort for
Right,
certain
right,
destinations
exactly.
and different destinations change. I mean, what we once thought was, years ago, nobody was kind of allowed into Eastern Germany or some of these other
Right.
countries, and that changes.
Oh yeah, and I did an amazing road trip the year before the 700th anniversary. The 700th. Now that's not the right number. It would have been the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. I was invited by Germany to do a solo road trip from
Wow.
Berlin down to Wittenberg and over to Eisenach and some of those other sites that were significant in the Reformation, but all along the way, seeing UNESCO World Heritage sites that were unrelated to that, gardens from the not Middle Ages, from the Renaissance, or the what I've been trying to say, tree walkways, up in the beech tree forests and things like that. So it was a great trip, and that is an area
Yes.
that, yeah, when I first started traveling to Europe, for instance, that was still East Germany. That was still behind the wall. In
Yeah.
fact, my first trip to Berlin was extension from a business trip, and it was the year after the wall fell. So it would have been in 91, early 91, I think, with the wall falling in late 89. And it was amazing because I actually on that trip couldn't find any evidence of the Berlin Wall. I mean, I couldn't, it was gone largely by the time I was there.
Really? Oh,
There are
wow.
parts of it now that I know where they are and that you can go see, but when you're at the Brandenburg Gate or whatever, those sort of iconic things from when I was growing up,
Right.
the wall was gone within a year, and most of the wall is gone. But then you'd go out to places like Potsdam and you'd still see bullet holes in the walls from World War II. So it was a fascinating experience.
Oh my goodness. Wow. So how do you plan your travels, keeping up with these conferences? It kind of gets to be.
Well, it's a little easier now that I just retired from the day job, but most of this time I've been doing this with a full-time job as well, which meant it was challenging. So you had to be a little opportunistic in terms of where you were going and when, and how could you extend that trip, to add on something else. So, did I have time to go with the TBEX, for instance? There's always some pre-trips that anybody who attends can go on, one of the day trips that is exploring the local region. And then there are FAM trips or familiarization trips that anybody can pitch to go on. And you obviously have to be chosen and you have to have a reason why they're choosing you. Usually that's an audience. And, I have enough of an audience that I can go on those. I can usually well, I guess pretty much always get picked, but I hadn't always had the time.
Right.
So, that's always the challenge. But, how can you use the most of your vacation days that you've got if you're working a full-time job, or how can you do career breaks like I did at least on one occasion where there were 6 years that I worked part-time and then basically was able to travel a lot more and get that number of countries I've been to up by being able to say yes when people call you and say, "Hey, do you want to come to the Yukon like next week?"
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
which usually means something fell through, right? Something didn't go as
Yes.
planned. They don't normally invite you a week out, but it's nice to be able to say yes when someone invites you to go in a plane and land on a glacier or something like that. So
Yeah, that is amazing. So what were
yeah.
did you do some of the fam trips then in Spain for the last
So
conference?
yeah, Spain, I did the fam trip to Bilbao,
Okay.
which was amazing for me because a lot of the tourism, especially from the US, has really peaked in that region after the construction of Frank Gehry's uh, very iconic museum there, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. And so we did go and see the Guggenheim there, which as a fan of architecture, but less of a fan of modern art, I think is a great building and has surprisingly little art in it. But
Really? Oh,
great
okay.
big art installations, and I definitely walk into some modern art things and say, that's art. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But enjoyed that, enjoyed Bilbao and this old industrial town. Think of Bilbao like Pittsburgh in the US that has been revitalized, but used to be, smokestacks and furnaces and things like that. And so an interesting town. A lot of money was in Bilbao, but it was a gritty town. Um,
Oh, okay.
so I think similarly would be, oh gosh, what's the one of the TBEXs was in Eastern uh, Czech Republic or Czechia, and it was in a town that I'm drawing a complete blank on, but it was
Yeah.
similar. It was that or a very industrial region, and it's fascinating for me as somebody who's a tech nerd to go to those sorts of places. And we went out into the countryside to a factory that was a beret factory, which is a beret is apparently of Basque origin, not
Oh,
French
really?
origin.
Oh, see?
And so, and went and saw one of the largest collections of Rolls Royces, which was interesting. Although for me, the older cars that they had in their collection was fascinating. The original kind of cars is more interesting than some 1970s Silver Shadow. But it was in a castle, of course, because
Hey,
y-
that's where
you
you
know
put those cars.
you're in
Yeah.
Spain. So fascinating place.
Yeah, that does sound fascinating because I didn't make it to Bilbao, so it sounds
Hmm.
like there was actually quite a bit there.
Yeah, and actually they're redoing their other art museum, the Fine Art Museum, and so that will be for people who love art, there will be even more that you can see if you come in, say, a year or so. But an interesting culinary scene in Bilbao, and very interesting city. But it would be a great place to spend more time, I think.
Yeah.
And
That
San Sebastian, I also felt the same way about. Beautiful city.
Oh, I did too. Because I did before that. I had not. It just wasn't on my radar. You hear so much in Spain about Barcelona,
Yeah,
Madrid, the big
it
ones.
it would probably yeah, it probably would quickly jump to my top 12 places to see, most beautiful cities in Europe. I think San Sebastian on this, beautiful beach
Yeah.
area and, with the old town and things like that. It was quite stunning.
And the food was incredible. I don't think you could
Food's
pick
good.
up.
I don't tend to be a big seafood fan, so Spain is always a little challenging
Oh,
for me. They eat a lot of seafood, but I did enjoy the food in San Sebastian.
yeah, definitely. So, what has been a place that, which now you've been to many, many places, has there been a place that was more challenging in your mind?
Uh, Well, I mean, there are challenges in different places. So, for instance, I love Africa, but sub-Saharan Africa, the infrastructure is always a little challenging. I remember I was down in a volunteer trip in Tanzania, and we, had all our plans of this job that we were going to do the next day, and we had all our power tools ready, and sure enough the power just went out for hours. And you just run into those sort of situations when you're in developing countries where you just need a little more patience because that can easily just happen. And there are obviously places where you need to be a little more care in terms of food that you eat. Although I have eaten street food in India, for instance, took a group of listeners of the show to India and we all ate street food, and our guide would stop us along the side of the road. And, oh, they're making those fritters there. You've got to try these. And you'd get fritters cooked along the side of the road and handed to you in yesterday's newspaper. And nobody got sick on that trip.
Oh,
But
thank goodness.
but
Yeah.
on the other hand, we did a group of listeners to the first trip we did to Morocco with listeners of the show to southern Morocco, we were out on camels in a thunderstorm in the Sahara, which is a sentence you don't get to say that often. And we needed to get out of there. We went back into the town and we tried to wait out the thunderstorm, and our guides made us tea, and we think they didn't boil the water long enough, and about half the group got sick. And that's, you when you're in places like that, what you drink and what you eat are things you have to be a little more careful about than when you're in France or Germany or well, England. It's just, it's just that it's English food, but other than that,
Right. Yeah, and that was, I mean, that was the one thing, like for me, the kind of the stretch country was going to Egypt in just
mm,
last year, and just that whole mental thing of like, don't brush your teeth with the tap water, don't,
sure.
because, it's just different. And
for
so,
for my wife, going to the first country where she couldn't drink the water was a bit of a challenge. I think by the time I got her to China, which was her first country that you couldn't drink the water, and I'd already been to, say Mexico 20 times by that
yeah,
point. Well, maybe only 15 by the time we went to China. But, the first time was a barrier. And then you learn to, it's not that hard to learn to live with. Obviously, billions of people, a billion people have learned to
right.
live with it. And so, but it is, stretching your comfort zone a little more, right? And the places where you like China where you can't read the signs.
Yes.
Yeah, Cyrillic is, a little level of a challenge, and um, but once you get into Chinese characters, and I think when I was in China, I had studied Chinese because I live in a Chinese neighborhood in Silicon Valley. My kids went
Oh,
to a school that's 80% Chinese. Mostly they're, everybody's dad was an engineer, or their, mom and dad were both engineers in high tech. And so, my daughter says she was in junior high before she realized that not everybody's dad was an engineer. But
yeah.
so I studied Chinese for a while, and I think I got up to maybe 200 characters best case. But, still, you need more like 5,000 characters to be fluent, and so you can, go into Beijing and read the signs and say, well, that says Beijing big something. so, so
Yeah.
that key character is the character I don't know. So,
Right.
but on the other hand, that knowing even those small amount led me to be able to go to a phone and see that I was in Shanghai, and there was a phone that had a Chinese that had a button that you could press to get help in English, which is
Oh,
cool.
that is cool.
The label for it was in Chinese. The label for it was the Chinese character ing.
Oh
And I just
no.
looked at that and laughed because I knew exactly what they were doing, but it wasn't going to help most people.
Yeah,
Or
most.
you're in the Japanese subway system. I remember the first time I was there, I've had friends who said they couldn't master the Japanese subway system, but most of the instructions in the machine that got you tickets were in English or were available in English, except for one button, and one button was labeled in katakana, so the Chinese characters, and it was small or big. Are you a child or are you an adult?
Oh,
And it was helpful to know those basic Chinese characters. So you definitely run into those sort of language issues, trying to figure out the how to get a ticket on the subway in Czech when you speak no Czech and you had no cell phones at the time,
yes. That's what I
was
mean.
more challenging than it is now. So
Yeah, you didn't have the Google Translate to help
no,
you. Yeah.
yeah, Google Translate and a good international roaming plan, or a local SIM, or nowadays an eSIM. I mean, there's never been a time that it's been easier to travel than it is today.
Yeah, exactly. So where do you find that people for travel deals? Do you make use of travel deals yourself? Do you?
I look at them all the time. Recently, I'm looking at them all the time because now that I have so much time, more time to travel. Yeah, I look everywhere.
I know. It's
So
sometimes
Travel
overwhelming.
Zoo, I get their newsletter because they have some interesting deals on all sorts of things. For cruises right now, I'm really looking to get a cruise down the west coast of Africa,
Oh.
and one of the best resources for cruise deals is Vacations to Go.
Hmm.
Vacations to go.com has great ways of finding travel deals, especially solo travel deals or travel deals for seniors or travel deals by company or by region. It's a great resource for that. The site looks like it's from the 1990s. That's one of those the 1990s called and they want their site back, but it is a very good resource for that. So there's all sorts of things for flying. I'm definitely getting things from Going, for instance, going.com, which is a newsletter that does flight deals, is some place that I get flight deal, emails every day. And, many of them are like, nope, that's not someplace I need to go right now. And some of them are like, that sounds
Right,
interesting.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
going, I do get those and I do enjoy, yeah, they're tempting a lot of times because they
Oh,
are,
yeah,
it just depends though what you're looking for.
exactly. Exactly. So yeah, my email is full of travel deals.
So, do you think you'll ever turn your adventures into a book?
Probably not. I don't tend to read travel memoirs.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
that takes some of the interest away from reading travel memoirs. So it's not something that I tend to read. So I'd be much more interested in writing a novel, but I don't know that I'll ever write one of those. My son has written one, but I don't think I necessarily have a novel in me. So we'll see. But I don't picture it right now. It's not on my short list of, 1,000 things to do now that I'm retired. So,
Right, exactly. The growing list. But
yep.
yeah, because pre-internet, I don't know, I just devoured travel books. We didn't have
Hmm.
the internet to get information, and so just the way people wrote, or even Charles Kuralt, the way he wrote about the United States and going to a particular place at a particular season, I found that fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of Bill Bryson was probably my favorite travel author. So his are travel memoirs, but don't read a lot of other travel memoirs and haven't even been reading a lot of Bryson more recently. But I read just a lot of fiction or a lot of history or things like that. So that tends to be my jam.
Yeah, that's interesting. So are you still taking listeners then on trips into
Yeah, yeah. So every year pre-pandemic, we did a trip where the listeners would vote on a place to go. Then we had a few years where the pandemic canceled it, or we had other things that ran into it. But we restarted this year. Took a group of listeners to northern Morocco,
Oh, wow.
Casablanca and Fez, and well, we ended up in Marrakesh, so we ended up in southern Morocco, but we were mostly up in the north in Tangier and in Chefchaouen, and it was a great trip. And then next February, I have a group of listeners that are, I say I'm taking them. Really, they're taking me technically financially
Right.
to Cuba.
Oh,
So
Cuba.
yeah.
Have you
But
been to
basically,
Cuba
I
before?
have not been to Cuba. No, I am not the guide. There we will have somebody who is a competent guide who has Spanish better than mine and knows Cuba. So we usually do it with backed up by a travel company that knows the region, whatever region we're going to. And so, yeah, we started with basically where do you want to go any place in the world? And people nominated places, and then we narrowed it down to about 5 places, and then picked from that. And we were picking between South Korea and Cuba, and I don't even remember what the other three were, but I think we had at least 3 or 4 continents in the list of places, and tended to be more just a little more adventurous than, for instance,
Yeah.
France.
Yeah,
Or it,
these do sound a little bit
yeah.
more
And I
adventurous.
think one of the reasons for that is it's so easy to go to France or Italy. The infrastructure
Right.
for travelers, even English speaking travelers, is pretty good. And so, for instance, one of the reasons we've gone to Morocco twice is it's a great place to go, but especially a lot of women less interested in going solo.
Yes.
And the first trip we had one young woman who came who said the first day she was hassled a lot more. And then once she was with a group, it was easy. And so some people have had that kind of experience. And so places like that, or Egypt, we took a group to Egypt originally. That was the first trip back in 2010, was part of a larger group. So it wasn't all amateur traveler listeners at that time. Podcasting was smaller then.
Yes.
So audiences were a little smaller. But yeah, it tends to be places like, South Africa and Cambodia. We've gone to India. So places where people say, I'd like to go there, but I'd like to go with a group.
Exactly. Yeah, and there are benefits. I know for myself
Hmm.
as well. I mean, there's still places where you just and it's going to vary person to person that you just still feel intimidated, or there's the language, and like you said, the
Hmm.
all the stuff, and so it's more.
I also do just like small group
I
travel. I
do
like solo
too.
travel also. I do some of that, but when I'm thinking about using some of my, well, I was going to say vacation time. You used to have to worry about that. I would think about group trips. So I went on a group trip with G to Belize and Guatemala last
Oh,
fall. Um,
wow.
no, sorry, last summer. And because it just seemed like it was going to be a fun trip. And for me, where I'm spending all my time trying to get shows out and write blog posts and things like that, sometimes just going on a trip where someone tells me what we're going to do the next day
Yes.
is nice.
Yeah. Well, and meeting other people that are
Yeah,
passionate, share that
exactly.
interest
It'd
in
be a fun group.
travel. Because, like you said, a lot of times we work alone, whether you're
Yep.
self-employed or, a lot
Yep.
of jobs now, you're working in your own little world. So just to,
Well, in fact, I've been working in my futon, in my office here before it was de rigueur, before the pandemic. I was already working alone remotely, just emotionally remotely. But so
yeah. Well, Chris, this has been fabulous. So tell people where they can find you if they don't already know about the Amateur Traveler podcast, and
yeah, you can find me at amateurtraveler.com or wherever podcasts are available. You'll probably find Amateur Traveler there as well.
that's
It
where
is
you're.
an audio podcast, I should say, unlike this show.
Right, exactly. And that's where too they can sign up to follow or do you send
Sure.
out newsletters
Mhm.
every now and then?
I'm trying to get to a point where I send out newsletters weekly now that I have
Wow.
time. It was more of a tri-monthly newsletter before where I would try and get one out monthly. So,
Yeah.
uh,
So, oh, I'd love to have people sign up because I'm sure they might want to travel with you on your next group outing. How far in advance are you already plotting the next listener?
usually about a year out.
Okay.
The problem is that you don't want to do it too far out because people's plans change.
Right.
So one of the trips that got clobbered because too many people had to cancel because somebody who was attending was actually a friend of mine. His daughter planned a wedding the week after the trip, and he's like, I can't take the chance that I'm going to get COVID or something like
Oh,
that
yeah.
traveling and miss her wedding. Well, they had friends who were coming with them, so four people dropped out. Well, my wife had already dropped out because our daughter was expecting that
Oh,
really right when the trip was
yeah.
happening. So by that point we dropped below the threshold about seven, which is the break even threshold. And honestly, I wanted to
Oh,
be
well,
there after my
yeah.
daughter gave birth anyway, so it worked better at that point to cancel. But so you can't do it too far in advance, but you also can't do it too soon. Some people, even a year out, can't plan vacation time. They really need 2 years because of where their work situations is. And so
Really.
it's you're kind of stuck in that in between, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is tough. Well, this has been fabulous, Chris. TheAmateurTraveler.com. Check it out if you haven't already been following Chris, all these different places. And I hope to see you again, Chris, at either an upcoming TBEX
Sure.
or somewhere out in the world. So,
I'll probably be at least a couple next year.
yeah, good. Thank you again, Chris. This has been wonderful.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.